For today's video, I've gotten my hands on the all-new 2019 Toyota Corolla Hatchback, also known as the Toyota Auris in other world markets. For 2019, Toyota has given us an entirely new vehicle that shares essentially nothing with the outgoing Corolla IM. And this also gives us a bit of a preview of what to expect for the new 2020 Toyota Corolla sedan that should be coming out very, very soon. If you hunt around on my channel, you'll see that there's a video previewing the 2020 Corolla sedan, but obviously we haven't been able to drive it. However, we have been able to drive this model and, of course, do all of our usual performance testing. That's what you'll find in this video. Although this segment appears to be shrinking a little bit, Toyota is definitely committed to it. That's because the Corolla is one of their best-selling vehicles, period. For 2019 and 2020, there'll be a little bit less competition because we aren't going to be seeing the Ford Focus or the Chevy Cruze anymore, but we will be getting an all-new Mazda 3 hatchback. And then we're getting some kind of different competitors here as well, because we now have EVs, which you could logically compare to this in the Chevy Bolt and, of course, the Nissan Leaf, or hybrid vehicles like the Kia Niro. Toyota has certainly been known for bringing us controversial designs recently, but the Corolla and the Corolla Hatchback are not among them. So up front, we have definitely a more aggressive look than the previous generation Corolla, but nothing too controversial is going on up here. We have some distinctive LED light pipes in the headlamps. LED headlamps are standard, and they're significantly better than the previous generation Corolla's headlamps. And if you get the top-end XSE trim, which is what we're driving right here, then they actually steer in the corners. That makes this one of the least expensive ways you can buy steering headlamps in America. On either side of this large grille, we find available LED headlamps down there, and then behind that Toyota logo, we have a radar sensor. The radar sensor is found up front because this is one of the first Toyota vehicles to receive their latest active safety system. They're calling it Safety Sense 2.0. This builds on what we see in the Toyota Camry and other Toyota models with some additional features. So we have that radar sensor up front. There's also a camera right there behind the windscreen, and that gives this vehicle autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian and cyclist detection and a broader range of operating conditions. So this will work when it gets a little bit darker outside versus the system that we see in the Toyota Camry. We also have lane keeping assistance, adaptive cruise control, auto high beams, and again the steering headlamps if you get this XSE with the CVT. An interesting twist is we still get the adaptive cruise control system if you opt for the manual transmission, and that's something that we don't see in very many of its competitors. Bucking the trend of vehicles getting larger and larger and larger over time, the Corolla Hatchback comes in at 169.9 inches long. This is notably smaller than the Honda Civic hatchback, about 8 inches shorter overall. It's only about 2 inches off of the Volkswagen Golf. That's likely because this model was definitely designed for Europe and other world markets where vehicles need to be a little bit more compact. That results in the Corolla Hatchback being something of a tweener. This is only about 5 inches shorter than a Nissan Versa Note, and in terms of overall length, it's actually a little bit closer to some subcompacts in America than overall compacts. But again, this is based on the upcoming Toyota Corolla sedan, or the Corolla sedan is based on this, whichever way you want to look at it. So this is still a compact vehicle with compact vehicle pricing, not a subcompact vehicle like that Versa. And that's really obvious when you get inside the Corolla Hatchback, where we find an interior that definitely belongs in the compact segment, not the less expensive subcompact segment. Out back, we find full LED tail lamp modules. We have LED turn signals that you can see flashing right there, LED brake lights, and LED accent strips as well. These are not combination lamps like we see in some of the other vehicles out there. You can also see from this angle that we have this very sloping rear hatch. That adds a little bit of extra style to the Corolla, but it does reduce the cargo practicality, and that's why the cargo area back here is a little bit smaller than some of the competition. Down at the bottom, we see a trick borrowed from the Audi playbook, and we have fake dual exhaust tips. The real exhaust tip is actually tucked up under the bumper there. These have no openings at all. In the US, we get just one engine under the hood of the hatchback. It's a new 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that produces 168 horsepower and 155 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to either a 6-speed manual or continuously variable transmission. When that gear is used up, it then switches over to the continuously variable mechanism. From that point on, the CVT can either act as a CVT if you're accelerating gently, or if you're accelerating aggressively, it will attempt to imitate a stepped automatic transmission. Toyota is doing this for two reasons. The first is to give the Corolla a more traditional feel as it launches. The second is to expand the overall ratio spread, because a particular problem with CVTs in the past has been that their lowest ratio and their highest ratio are not as far apart as many modern transmission designs, especially some of the newer 8, 9, and 10-speed automatics out there. This transmission attempts to fix that by broadening that ratio spread with the first gear and then still giving you that continuously variable portion up top. It's actually thematically kind of similar to what we see in some of Nissan's newest models that incorporate a 2-speed transmission and the CVT inside the same case. Thanks to this new design, you can get up to 36 miles per gallon if you get the SE version of the Corolla Hatch and the CVT. It goes down to 33 if you choose the XSE because we get wider tires, and down to 31 miles per gallon if you get the 6-speed manual. Front seat comfort is good for this segment. We have a 2-way adjustable lumbar support in the front seats that is just a little bit below some of the best seats you'll find in this segment, but the overall seat design is very comfortable, and we have a decent range of motion in this power driver's seat. There's also a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a moderate range of motion, and we have a manual passenger seat just as you'd expect in the compact segment. Moving to the rear, the more compact dimensions of the Corolla Hatch versus the competition are immediately noticeable. With 71.9 inches of combined legroom, this is definitely on the smaller side of the compact segment and actually closer to some subcompact vehicles out there, or actually even a little bit below some of them as well. Headroom is pretty generous back here thanks to the overall hatchback dimensions. I have about an inch of headroom left sitting very upright, but you'll notice that legroom is definitely limited. I have about an inch and a half left over there. And if I move over to the right side of the vehicle, where this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, my knees are touching the seats and there's really not a lot of foot room left. If you're looking for a hatchback with more room inside the cabin, you'll definitely find more room in the new Elantra or the Honda Civic hatch, but the Corolla, remember, is going to be a little bit easier to park because of its overall size. The rear seats do fold down and they fold completely flat with the cargo area in the back. It's a 60/40 design, and then we have a fold down center armrest with cup holders as well. The overall size of the Corolla definitely has an impact on that rear seat legroom, and it has an impact on the cargo area as well, as does this very sloping rear design. Because back here we have just 17.8 cubic feet of storage space. That is definitely below the new Hyundai Elantra and actually below most of the compact hatches in this segment as well. The big thing you'll notice back here is that we can fit a 22-inch roller bag in this position and still close the hatch, but we actually cannot turn it in that position and still have the hatch lid closed if you have the rear seat backs up, even if I pull out this hard cargo partition right there. That's because there's just not enough room back here, and you can also really see the aggressive slope of this rear opening. On the bright side, if we lift up the cargo area load floor, we do have a spare tire under here. It's one of the donut variety, and there's probably not enough room back here to put a full-size spare tire. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end XSE trim. We have 2-way adjustable headrests and height-adjustable shoulder belts. The rear seats feature a very similar design to the front, and we have a shoulder belt that's integrated into the rear seat bench rather than coming out of the ceiling. Definitely something that I prefer. The seats themselves are upholstered in a combination of Toyota's imitation leather product and a fabric center section in the seat back cushion and seat bottom cushion. You can see there's fairly aggressive bolstering for a compact vehicle over there on the seat back and bottom cushion as well. Toyota really decided to up their game when it came to designing this overall interior and choosing more premium materials as well. So we have a lot more soft touch materials going on the front doors than we found in the last generation Corolla, and the overall design is definitely more restrained and elegant than we've seen in some of Toyota's other products. You'll of course still find harder plastics down there at the bottom of the door, around that speaker grille, and of course the bottle holder. The overall interior design is definitely recognizable as a Toyota product, but it also is a little bit different than some of Toyota's more recent launches. As with the doors, we find more soft touch materials going on the dashboard than we found in the previous generation. There's a soft touch upper section, this soft touch middle section, and then we do find hard plastics lower in the cabin, just as you'd expect in a compact vehicle. The upgraded materials continue on the dashboard, where we find a soft touch injection molded upper section and this soft touch injection molded middle section. It's been after stitched to give it the impression of multiple pieces of material. On the passenger side, the bin-style glove compartment was barely able to handle a 10-inch tablet computer. Larger ones may not be able to fit. In the middle of the dashboard, we find a color touchscreen infotainment system that now features Apple CarPlay, which is a big deal for the Toyota brand in America. It's worth noting that we still don't see Android Auto integration because Toyota and Google have some disagreements about exactly what kind of data Android Auto is reporting back to Google. Supposedly, that is the origin of the missing Android Auto here. Hopefully that will be resolved soon. In the meantime, however, we do have Amazon Alexa integration, which is kind of an interesting twist for a vehicle. The addition of Apple CarPlay means that all models effectively have factory navigation if, of course, you have a compatible smartphone. The rest of the software is basically the same that we've seen out of Toyota before. It's basically a variant of what we see in the Toyota Camry. Below the infotainment screen, we find the dual-zone automatic climate control and the engine start-stop button. Below the climate controls, the dashboard steps in, and this is where we find a storage area for your smartphone. There's also a Qi wireless charging mat there, and the controls for the heated seats. It's a high and low toggle. Continuing back, we find some more soft touch materials right around this shifter area. We have a pretty traditional console shifter. Drive is back there, manual mode over to the left. And from this angle, you could just barely see the sport button and the button to turn on and off the traction control. Behind the shifter, we have the control for the electric parking brake, an auto brake hold button right there, and then two decently sized cup holders. The center armrest is softly padded. It's covered with the same material as the sides of the seats. It slides forward and backward to adjust to people of different heights. And if we open this up, we find a USB charge-only port that is capable of charging tablet computers, and then a 12-volt power port next to it. The model that we're driving has a partial LCD instrument cluster. There's a physical tachometer on the left, physical dials for the fuel gauge and engine temperature, and then everything else you're seeing is that color LCD. This is where we find things like our trip computer readouts, our eco gauge. You can also get turn-by-turn navigation directions, the status of the vehicle's active safety systems, infotainment readouts, and you can adjust certain vehicle settings, primarily dealing with the active safety tech on this car. The steering wheel is a round design with some sport grips up top and a split bottom spoke. The infotainment controls are split on both sides of the wheel, so we have volume up, down, a voice command button over here on the left, and then mode and then track forward and backward over here on the right. Cruise controls are no longer on a stalk, instead they're right here on the face of the steering wheel. The button cluster on the left side of the wheel deals primarily with that multifunction LCD, but then we also have a dedicated phone button as well. On the back of the steering wheel, we have paddle shifters. There's down on the left side of the steering wheel and then up on the right. Before we move on, I have to say that I did find one thing about this interior a little bit odd, and it's over here on the driver's side, because we have a soft touch dashboard up here on top, soft touch door panels over here on the left, but this piece right here is actually a hard plastic, which is different from that same shape over here on the passenger side, which is all a soft touch material. I think that's a little bit of a pity, because that is something that the driver would interact with now and then when getting in and out of the vehicle or groping for a control over there on the left side of the steering wheel. I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. We haven't been able to test the manual transmission version of the Corolla hatchback for 0 to 60 times, but I suspect it's going to take a little bit longer than the CVT model that we have right here. And the CVT is going to be the most popular trim. That's why I asked for this one. The reason that the manual transmission is going to be a little bit slower is because this continuously variable transmission does not imitate stepped gears if you floor it from a stop. We just get that initial first gear acceleration, then it moves over to the CVT, so you'll feel that one shift, and then from that point on, it just hangs out there right around 6,200 RPM or so as the vehicle accelerates. That is definitely the most efficient way and fastest way to get from 0 to 60. That's why this particular model manages that task in 7.9 seconds, which is actually a little bit faster than many of the competitive models with CVTs, because a lot of the competition no longer does that same trick. In terms of overall comparisons, that puts this behind the 1.5 liter turbo that we find in the Honda Civic. That's quite logical, since that does produce more torque, and depending on the trim, more power as well, and a little bit ahead of something like the Nissan Sentra in most trims. A lot of Nissan's most recent products will imitate a stepped automatic transmission, even if you're starting from a complete stop under full throttle acceleration, and that does actually make those vehicles slower 0 to 60. While we're talking about the way transmissions behave, I have to say that Toyota's CVT is pretty quick at shifting ratios. So if we're out here driving this vehicle gently, the RPMs are down there right around 1,000, but as we exit this corner, if I were to floor it in a moment here, there we go, it actually does shift ratios pretty quickly up to about 4,000 RPM, and then we get that acceleration. That's something that we also see in the Honda Civic. However, after that is done, and when you're driving more moderately, the Honda Civic's transmission feels a little bit more in tune with the driver. Sometimes this transmission has imitation shifts that feel a little bit awkward. They're a little bit slow, a little bit mushy, sometimes strangely timed as well. I think that the overall shift logic isn't quite as well baked as what we see in the Nissan CVTs or Honda's new CVT in that Civic and of course in the Accord. On the other hand, having that physical first gear in this transmission allows this vehicle to have a very wide ratio spread, and that really helps out when it comes to fuel economy. But let's talk about braking first. This model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 122 feet, which is pretty good for this segment. Keep in mind that the XSE trim, which is what we're driving right here, has wider tires than the SE trim, so it's going to take a little bit longer to go 0 to 60 in that model. The narrower tires may also have a negative impact on your 0 to 60 acceleration because this transmission has a fairly aggressive starting ratio. Unlike many CVTs, we actually get some wheel spin even in this XSE version. When it comes to overall handling, grip levels are good when you're comparing the SE to competitive base models or this XSE trim to competitive mid-range models. This isn't going to handle like top-end trims of the Honda Civic, and it's not going to handle quite like top-end trims of the Hyundai Elantra either, because those vehicles do have slightly better tunes to their suspension. They're definitely a little bit sportier. I think this XSE trim, however, is a very good middle-of-the-road trim. We do get a decent amount of body roll in this model, but we do have a relatively softer suspension than some of those sportier trims. But at the same time, the suspension does not get upset in the back, especially over larger bumps or rougher roads, that sort of thing, like you sometimes can feel in base versions of the Hyundai Elantra. So base versions of this can be a little bit more sorted than base versions of the Elantra, but I think the Honda Civic has a better polish level all the way around. The difference, however, is very, very small these days. That's something that I've noticed with a lot of Toyota's products recently when pitted against competitive Honda models, for instance the Camry versus the Accord. The Accord still has a slightly better polish to it, but the difference is very, very small, and that wasn't always the case. This definitely handles light years ahead of the current generation Corolla sedan. But as I said, this suspension is tuned a little bit softer than some of the competition's. So when it comes to our overall ride score, I'm going to give this an A for this segment because this has an excellent balance between ride and handling. When it comes to our overall cabin noise score, this scored 72 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which puts this sort of in the middle of things for the compact vehicle segment overall, but actually quite good for a compact hatchback. Compact hatches tend to be a little bit louder on the road because there's nothing separating that cargo area back there from the passenger cabin, and that does result in a little bit more noise being able to come into the cabin from the road. But overall, things are fairly well controlled. When it comes to overall fuel economy, we've been averaging 32 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving in this model. I have to say that's a pretty good fuel economy average because it has been a little cold, it has been rainy, which helps reduce fuel economy, and I have been driving this a little bit harder than some of the competition because it is pretty fun to drive out here. I've also been doing a little bit more in-city driving this week, and that also reduces the overall fuel economy. So when it comes to overall comparisons, this is very comparable to the Honda Civic and actually above what we see in the Hyundai Elantra. Hyundai and their sister brand Kia have really struggled with fuel economy overall, and this is definitely going to be more efficient than most of the models from those two Korean competitors. The good handling ability and high level of polish that we find in the Corolla hatch shouldn't really be too much of a surprise to you, because the same could really be said of the last generation Corolla hatch, also known as the Corolla IM. That's because the Corolla IM was really just the European Toyota Auris borrowed and brought to the United States. It didn't really have that much to do with the American market Corolla sedan. So in the previous generation of the Corolla, the hatch and the sedan handled quite differently from one another. But in this generation, they're actually going to be very, very similar because the upcoming 2020 Corolla sedan is actually going to be based on the same vehicle that this vehicle is based on. We're going to have the same basic suspension designs. The same engine is going to be available in that model, although the base engine will be a little bit less powerful, and there's going to be a hybrid model as well. The biggest deal, of course, with this generation of the Corolla is that overall handling ability is very, very close to the Honda Civic. The Honda Civic has generally been an excellent handling vehicle in this segment, especially in some of the sportier trims, but that hasn't always been the case with the Corolla, and this generation of the Corolla has really narrowed that gap down quite a bit. Most importantly, however, the Corolla is less expensive than the Honda Civic, and it just doesn't go up to the same high prices that we find in the Honda Civic, which means that in general terms, I think this is actually a better value. Let's talk about that now. Back when the Corolla hatchback was sold as a Scion, the pricing lineup was very, very easy to understand. It is a little bit more complicated for 2019, but they've still tried to streamline things. There's an SE trim, an XSE trim, and then there's a manual, an automatic, and really just one option package per trim. Things start at $21,090 for the SE trim, and it comes very well equipped in this segment. The key thing here is that it comes with all of the active safety tech standard. It also comes with most of Toyota's latest active safety technologies standard. The only real exception there is the blind spot system with rear cross-traffic detection, but that is available in the base trim for an extra $1,400, which also gets you their telematics system and an 8-inch infotainment screen. If you want to step up to the XSE trim, we get wider tires, some of the nicer trappings that we saw in the model that we were driving, and you can get that with a 6-speed manual or the CVT. The adaptive LED headlamps are standard on the model with the CVT, but optional on the XSE if you get the manual. You can check that option box. If you get the preferred package on the XSE trim, that is the most expensive you can get your Corolla, which is $25,690, and that gets you everything that we were driving this week. Key thing here is that $25,690 is significantly less expensive than the top-end trims of most of the competition. So let's dive right into that now. First up, we have the Honda Civic, obviously the most direct competitor to the Corolla and the Corolla Hatchback. The Civic is a little bit more expensive. It starts at $21,450. And we don't get quite the same kind of standard feature content in the Civic that we find in the Corolla. We don't get Apple CarPlay or Android Auto until you move up to the EX trim. You don't get navigation until you pay $26,250, and you don't get LED headlamps until you pay $28,750. But on the other hand, the Civic comes standard with the turbocharged engine, and it is available with more luxury features and gadgets and goodies than we have even available in the Corolla. The Civic is also a little bit bigger. It's a little bit roomier on the inside, and the cargo area is a little bit larger. Although a complaint that I've had about the Civic in the past is that in hatchback form, the cargo area is not as practical as a traditional hatchback. And that's because instead of trying to make the rear end of the Civic just a boxy version of the Civic, more like a small station wagon, they've tried to give it a very sexy side profile, and as a result, it actually has more of a side profile like a Toyota Prius, for instance, with more of a lift-back design than a true hatchback, and that does cut down on the overall practicality. The Civic is overall a little bit more fun than the Corolla. The standard turbocharged engine helps us go 0 to 60 faster. We have the relatively inexpensive Sport trim, which definitely sharpens things up for the Civic. And then, of course, if you want to go absolutely insane, you can get the Type R, which is very, very fast, and there really is no corollary in the Corolla lineup. But truth be told, there really is no corollary in the Corolla lineup for at least half of the Civic lineup. The top-end Civic Touring really doesn't have a corollary in the Corolla, as does the high-performance model either. When looking at comparably priced models, you'll definitely get a little bit more bang for the buck in the Corolla, and that really is the big selling point here. In addition, I'd likely wager that the Corolla is going to be less expensive to maintain long-term. Honda has had a few different teething troubles with their 1.5-liter turbo and their CVT, and we don't see that same sort of thing in the Corolla. Next up, we have the recently redesigned Hyundai Elantra. It starts a little bit less than the Corolla at $19,350, but we don't get an automatic in that base model. If you want the automatic, you have to step up to $20,350, which is an awful lot closer to the Corolla in terms of overall price. We get a little bit less power in the base engine of the Elantra versus what we see in the Corolla, and of course we don't get all of those standard active safety features either. The base trim of the Hyundai can have the option of blind spot monitoring, but if you want adaptive cruise control, the autonomous braking system, collision warning, lane departure warning, etc., that is definitely very optional and, importantly, only available in the top-end Sport trim. As I said in the drive section, the Corolla sort of straddles the Elantra in terms of overall performance. That Sport model gets a 201 horsepower 1.6-liter turbo. It is definitely faster than the Corolla. On the other hand, the base model is still a good value because even though we don't have those active safety features, it is notably less than the Corolla. It's also a little bit roomier on the inside, and the cargo area is definitely more practical. The overall shape of the Corolla's hatch meant that we were only able to fit two 24-inch roller bags back there, and that surprised me a little bit because I had hoped that we would be able to squeeze more in there. The overall size of the Corolla just puts it at a slight disadvantage compared to some of the larger entries in this particular segment. Overall fuel economy is going to average a little bit lower in the Elantra versus the Corolla hatchback, but we do get a traditional 6-speed. So if you're looking to avoid a continuously variable transmission, that's going to be one of the few options left with the traditional automatic in this particular segment. And of course, Hyundai includes their long standard powertrain warranty, which could be a big deal to some folks out there. Next up, we have the Mazda 3 hatch, but we're going to skip over this pretty quickly because we have a brand new Mazda 3 hatch coming out soon, and that's the picture that you see on your screen. The new Mazda 3 hatch is definitely going after style. The current Mazda 3 is definitely a stylish vehicle, but the new Mazda 3 really has an interesting take on it when it comes to the hatch model. I've seen it in person, and I'm not exactly sold on the overall rear-end styling. I think I like the sedan an awful lot more. Be sure to let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. As we see with the current Mazda 3 hatch, expected to start a little bit less expensive than the Corolla, likely between about $20,000 and $20,500. Although the exterior is a little bit quirky, the interior is quite different because it is definitely one of the more premium and more elegantly designed interiors in this segment. Mazda has really decided to try and target more premium shoppers with their latest vehicles, and the new Mazda 3 is no different there. Now, we don't know what the base trims will look like, and the models that we were able to get our hands on were likely around $30,000 to $35,000. The Mazda 3 may be one of the least expensive entries in this segment, but it's also likely going to be one of the more expensive options at the very top end of the spectrum. Now, obviously, I haven't had the chance to drive the Mazda 3 yet, but you should expect definitely sporty dynamics compared to the Civic, Elantra, and Corolla, but don't necessarily expect more power than we find in the Civic or Elantra's mainstream sporty models, and certainly nothing like the Civic Type R. Mazda has pretty flatly said that they have no plans on making a Mazda Speed 3. Now let's think about something a little bit different. How about a Kia Niro? Sure, Kia calls the Niro a crossover, but in reality it really is just a compact hatch. It's about the same length overall as average compact hatches here. It's actually about the same height off the ground as well, maybe just a little bit higher off the ground than a Corolla or a Civic. At $23,490, it is a little bit more expensive because the hybrid drivetrain comes standard, and with 139 horsepower, it's also less powerful. Again, a traditional trade-off for a hybrid. The Niro doesn't handle as well in base form because we definitely get skinny tires in that FE trim, but if you work your way on up the ladder, it actually does handle just about as well as the Corolla hatch. The main selling point for the Niro is fuel economy because that base trim will get 50 miles per gallon combined. And even if you choose the top end trim with the widest tires available, you'll still be getting 43 miles per gallon combined, a notable improvement over the Corolla. That results in about $600 worth of fuel savings a year for the average driver according to the EPA at this particular moment, or a savings of about $3,000 over 5 years. The result of that is that base Niro over the average lifetime will ultimately be less expensive to operate than the Corolla, and that is a pretty important factor to keep in mind. For a lot of folks, especially if you can stomach that higher initial price, it's going to pay off in the long term. As with the Elantra, the Niro gets a very long standard powertrain warranty and a long battery warranty as well if you're worried about that in a hybrid. We also get standard smartphone integration, unlike the Honda Civic, but like the Toyota Corolla, and a little bit more of a crossover vibe on the inside in terms of the overall seating position and the overall design. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit different than the average hatch, perhaps a little bit more crossover-y themed, the Niro could be a good option. And of course, if you're interested, there are also plug-in hybrid and a new upcoming electric-only version of the Niro. We don't see that at this moment in the Corolla hatch, although we do expect to see a Corolla hybrid coming very soon. Now, we don't know whether Toyota is going to put that hybrid system in the hatchback or whether it's just going to stay in the sedan at this point, but we do know that in the sedan, overall fuel economy will top what we see in the Niro. It's going to be essentially Prius-like fuel economy in the form of the Toyota Corolla. Hyundai and Kia have long been known for delivering excellent value in their vehicles, but when you start crunching the numbers, the Corolla does really well here also. The Korean brands have long been known for delivering excellent bang for the buck, but the Corolla really is fighting hard here in this segment when it comes to overall value. Again, thanks to those active safety systems, but also thanks to the standard smartphone integration and the standard continuously variable transmission. All of those things put together make the Corolla one of the best values in this segment. And fuel economy, even though it's not quite as high as some of the hybrid alternatives, is still very high for a traditional gasoline-only vehicle. When it comes down to what would I buy in this particular segment, I have to say that my top pick is likely still going to be the Honda Civic, because that turbocharged engine and the way that Honda has done their CVT is just a little bit more engaging than what we see in the Corolla. But the Corolla is still a better value than the Honda Civic. And that's an important distinction because I would probably buy the Civic in its top-end touring trim, and that's thousands of dollars more than the Corolla Hatchback. The Corolla Hatchback is just a really, really good buy in this particular segment. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and let me know what you would get in this particular segment, especially if you would wait for the upcoming Mazda 3. Now keep in mind, if you want some of the fancier features in your Mazda 3, some of the sportier dynamics, you're definitely going to have to pay more for it than a Corolla hatchback. But let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Find us over at facebook.com. If you haven't already done that, you can see what we're driving right now. Click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support this channel, and as always, click on those related videos and see what else we have driven recently. I'll see you later.